this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee to order. Can we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This meeting is being live streamed by Chelmsford Telemedia and posted to the CPS website for interested community members to access and watch. Although we are not allowing for in-person public participation, interested community members were encouraged to submit their names and addresses to Superintendent Lang if they wanted to participate remotely under the public input portion of our meeting. During our public input session, anyone who has joined us through the GoToMeeting platform and expressed interest in making a comment will be recognized by the superintendent and allowed to speak with the committee. If anyone watching this meeting live has questions or comments to share, they're encouraged to email one of us during the meeting. We'll read their questions or comments during our second public input session at the end of the meeting. So welcome to this meeting of the Chelmsford School Committee. We have a fairly busy agenda tonight, so we're going to start off with approval of our minutes from our last meeting on December 15th.
I move that the school committee approve the minutes from the general meeting of December 15th.
Second.
Okay, any corrections to the minutes? Okay, all in favor of approval? Aye. 5-0. All right, anyone have any good news they want to share?
That's me. Hold on, coming back. I'll be right with everyone. I just wanted to let you know that we received a competitive grant, $10,000 from DESE. Only 12 districts in the Commonwealth received this. And this is to help us with our SEL initiative, our MTSS initiative. It's going to allow us to give a survey out to our students, receive the data from DESE back from that survey, and it will help us just identify some more of the social emotional competencies of our students so that any of our support that we're doing now, we can make additional action plans. And it will also be super helpful for us for our strategic planning as well. So it's nice to receive that money to get some additional information from students and be able to find out what they're learning from what we're implementing now, and then attach it to the academic goals as well. So we were, excited to get the planning part of that, and Katie Sims, who's our wellness coordinator, is helping put this information together for us, so we're excited.
Hey, anybody else have any good news they want to share?
Okay, so they're not here. The CHS TV released its 7/19 newscast at the end of of December, and anybody can watch it on YouTube in the CHS TV channel. And every Tuesday and Thursday, they do what's called Lions Live, which is their announcements, but they do it to everybody, released throughout the entire school. In addition, in conjunction with the theater group, they did another release called News 3.0, which is kind of a mimic on Saturday Night Live, and has some funny things in it. So people may want to watch that as well. It's all on YouTube.
Anybody else have any good news they want to share? Okay, we're now to our first public comment section of our meeting, but I do not believe we have anybody registered to.
We didn't have anyone registered to speak, no.
All right, so we will move on to new business.
Thank you. I need just 1 second to get this set up here tonight, but we have our first school that's going to be presenting for us this evening. As you recall, over the course of the last number of years, usually the first meeting of a month, we have one of our schools talk about some of their highlights and some of the programming that's taking place. And then our second meeting, we have some of our coordinators and departments talk about the work that they're doing. So tonight, and actually we didn't get to this last year, CHIPS is going to be presenting. So CHIPS is our integrated preschool over at the Westland School. And we have Russ Hoyt, who is our preschool coordinator, and Amy Reese, who is our director of student support services, here tonight to have a presentation with you. And I'm going to advance the slides for them, but we do have the slides up on the screen. So Amy and Russ, are you guys able to hear us?
Let's see them.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, great. I wanted to just start off by saying thank you for allowing me to present. We're planning to share with you how we determine success for our preschoolers, and it's through a device that we've developed called the Developmental Checklist, which allows us to take a look at their progress in certain areas of their development. If you could go to the next slide for me.
Yep, give me 1 second, Russ.
Okay.
No, I have to just do that. Actually, no, he's fine. Where did it go?
You had it up as a PDF. It's the PDF.
Oh,
Oh my gosh. Capital improvements.
okay, sorry about that, Russ, you're good to go now, so we're now on page 2.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jay. So our first goal is to help children develop a love of learning. When a student says, I want to go to school, that's one of the ways that we know that we've been successful. This year in moving into preschool, it took a whole new look and a whole new feel, but we still have students who really are telling us how much they love to be at school every day. We could go to the next slide.
I did.
All right. In determining the level of success our preschoolers have, we measure taking a look at 3 different levels. The levels are skillful, or being able to independently complete tasks. The second level would be emerging, or what we like to call getting there, meaning that the students are able to sometimes do these tasks on their own. And then the third level that we measure is they're always requiring help to do these tasks, which, if you think about it, some of our students enter at 3 years old, and some of the tasks we're expecting them to do, we're not surprised that they need help to get them done at this time. So that's how we're measuring their skill levels. We take a look at our next slide. Our students do not come to school in the big yellow bus, but they are exciting to be growing towards the kids who are known as the big kids. And in our next slide, I just wanted to make sure that everyone realized where our skills are based on. And the skills that we're measuring are based on the early childhood standards, which are derived from the Massachusetts framework. So we're looking at aligning what our kids are starting to learn in preschool with the K-12 standards. We've also taken a look at the Common Core, which were put out by the Federal Department of Education a few years back. But the most prevalent document that we look at are the guidelines for preschool and kindergarten learning experiences. It's also important, and maybe even more important, to realize that the skills that we're going to talk about tonight are not expected until the 5-year age level. So we're measuring our 3-year-olds and our 4-year-olds and the kids who are turning 5, not yet going to kindergarten yet, as to what they're going to be able to accomplish as 5-year-olds. The children are not expected to be scoring at the highest level. And it's important to realize that when we talk about a 5-year-old expectation, we are talking about a 5-year-old without a disability as to what they would be doing in a kindergarten classroom without any modification. So that's the way that we indicate what it is that we're looking for. So it's important to also note that children can, should, and will go to kindergarten without scoring at the highest level. There are 4 categories that we look at. We're looking at language arts, social skills, and self-awareness, motor skills, and then mathematics and science. So if we go to the next slide, you can see our language arts. When we're measuring success for our preschool students in language arts, we look to see their ability with things like attending, with turn taking. We're measuring their ability to follow directions. We're also measuring their communication both receptively, in that they can show what they know, and expressively, where they can show how they use language. We're also trying to measure things like how they recognize letters. So recognition would be a student actually showing us a letter when we name it, but also naming letters, which is the student telling us what a letter is when we point to it. So we're looking for both ways of students to be able to reflect how that information is being learned. On the next slide, you can see students that are following a group lesson. So what we really try to emphasize here is that when students learn to follow a group lesson, they're learning how to sit, how to attend to a teacher-led activity, to be able to follow those instructions. This is something that's key to language arts and key to that future learning, to actually be able to be successful in a classroom setting. In the next slide, You can see a student who is taking an appropriate turn in a conversation. Sometimes the way that we facilitate those conversations is by actually having a visual representation of something they want to say to another student. They present it visually, and then that student actually responds to them verbally. So we're actually teaching them that value of give and take in a communicative exchange. Another huge factor for us, and it's a new and exciting piece for us, is the Foundations program. You can see a student in this picture who is actually working to identify letters. She's able to do 3 different things with one Foundations lesson. She's able to match letters. She's also able to recognize letters. So if we ask, show me the letter P, the student can then point to that letter. And then also naming letters is another activity that we can have where we would say to the student, we might point to the letter L and say, what is this? So all 3 of those components are something through language arts that the Foundations has really added to our curriculum this year. In the next slide, you can see here an example of students who can learn to recognize letters either in a group setting or one-to-one working with a teacher. They can actually have boards where they can trace and show what the letters are. And then sometimes if you complete a 3-step direction and it results in a new structure, you even get to celebrate by dancing a little bit. It's one of the fun things that can happen at preschool. For our next slide, when we're measuring success for preschool students in the areas of social skills and self-awareness, we're looking to see if they can follow expected classroom routines. We are trying to measure if they know important things about themselves and where they live. We're also trying to determine if they have good skills of being able to play with friends, and then even resolving conflicts that can arise in play or in an educational setting. And then we're teaching students how to be aware of and describe how we feel. When I presented to you, not last year, but the year before, we talked a lot about the social emotional standards. And Dr. Hirsch just mentioned to you a grant around the SEL, the social emotional learning. That's one of the key things that can be successful for students in a preschool setting. So it's great to hear that the district is going to be able to advance that for the higher grade levels as well. In my next slide, you can see a situation where sometimes teachers actually create simple conflict on purpose so that students can practice resolving those conflicts. What you can see here is you have a student who has one color of paint in front of him and he's painting a picture, wants to add another color to his painting. So he actually has to look over to a peer, ask that peer if they're done with a color, and if he can, use that to be able to resolve a conflict. He can't finish his painting by adding another color without interacting with a peer. In the next slide, you can see that even during COVID, we've been able to set up tables and set up play spaces where students have sort of a natural barrier in between them that gives them a little bit of space, but they can still share some common materials. What would happen with materials this year is that students would be able to play with them in a small cohort, then they would be removed and cleaned and set aside for the next day before another set of students would use the same toys. So we're still finding ways to create those opportunities for students to engage in cooperative play, which is an important component in their preschool learning experience. In the next slide, you can see an example of that some of the great things about the routines that we have in preschool is that they're just a lot of fun. We have kids doing restaurants and Dunkin' Donuts offices and preschool settings and building these great towers. So, even though these are routines they're trying to learn, they're having a lot of fun doing it. In our next slide, we're going to talk about motor skills. And when we measure the success for preschool students in the area of motor skills, we're looking at their ability to develop fine motor skills or use school tools. So writing instruments, scissors, things like that, and also their gross motor skills. So in that area, we're looking at how they learn to move and how they learn to build strength. The next slide shows a couple of students who are out on our playground. The playground that we were able to install last spring has been proved to be an amazing place for our children to learn new and challenging ways to move their bodies and really gain both coordination and strength. The next slide, you can see that sometimes we get to scoot around outside, again, that movement and building strength, but then there's other times where we'll do activities where we're improving our hand strength. So this is an example of students who are actually using tongs or long tweezers to pick up cotton balls. And what they're doing by squeezing those is they're improving their hand strength for things like being able to use scissors, and it also helps them to be able to hold a writing utensil and actually develop the hand strength that they're going to need for later writing skills. And in the last slide, the quote that you saw on the first slide about movement, I just love. It talks about that movement is the starting point for wiring the brain for learning. The more we get kids to move, the more ready and aware they are for the learning that's going to follow. And next, we're going to talk about math and science. And when we measure the success for our preschool students in math and science, we're looking to see their ability with recognition or showing us a number, a color, or shape when a teacher names it. We're also looking at their ability to name, which is what they will tell us the number, they will tell us the color, or they will tell us the shape when we point at it for them. We also have accounting each item, and that's referred to as one-to-one correspondence. So a child will actually touch each item as they count it, so that they're not just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they're actually laying their hand on each item as they count it, so they understand the concept that counting actually builds some of those later developing math skills. In the next slide, you can see an example of an activity that is both for great recognizing and pointing to numbers. So you have the student with numbers in front of them, where if the teacher points to an ask, they can actually name the number, and then by doing some matching on the right-hand side, you can see that there's an apple that's cut with matching numbers. They can then show that they recognize that number when they're asked to identify it and match it to the paper in front of them. In the next slide, you see lots of great games that we have that help the kids learn about things like sorting colors and matching colors. So there's, those are bowls that have actually the colored paper that matches the shape that they're identifying of certain colors, so that they can sort out all of those different colors. And then sometimes it's a game where when you put the colors in, at the end you get to see the fascinating ladybug that gets put together. And our final slide. In the end, I just wanted to bring you back to the beginning. As I mentioned, our first goal is to help children develop a love of learning. When we have students say, I want to go to school, that's what we know is a measure of success. And again, I want to come back to saying thank you. I do appreciate being allowed to present how it is that we're measuring the success of our preschool students in the CHIPS program.
Well, thank you, Russ.
Any questions from anybody? John?
The conflict resolution stuff, have you ever considered offering that for adults as well? Just curious.
Actually practicing it and making sure you get it right is not a bad thing to do, even as adults.
Awesome. In seriousness, I did want to say it's a great program. My daughter went through CHIPS, and it feels like about 1 million years ago, but I still remember the program, and I still talk to other parents that have gone through the program, and it's a very appreciated program in town. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's actually how we get most of our referrals, is from parents who've been through the program. They suggest it to others, so appreciate that.
Other questions? My question is, I probably should know this. What is their schedule like under this whole crazy scenario that we're in now? Do they go hybrid? Do they go full? I don't know. How do they attend?
I'll take that one.
Oh, sure. Amy can answer that one.
I'll take that one. We have prioritized in-person learning for the preschoolers, as that was one of the areas that Desi asked, to prioritize if at all possible. So the preschoolers are coming to school 4 days a week, so that they're there every day but Wednesday right now under the situation. So we're hopeful that's what we're going to continue to do for the remainder of the year, unless we're able to kind of increase time as things go on.
Great, thank you, Amy.
We do have one class that is fully remote that was requested by families, and that class has actually been going well. Remote is definitely, we've learned that remote is definitely a challenge for our youngest children. So I think the fact that Desi recommended, but also that Amy's been very supportive of getting kids in the building has been the way that they learn best.
Right, anybody else have
That's-
questions?
Questions about the comment about the love of learning. If you could come every single year, bring the little kids to every other class and remind them that that love of learning lives on forever, it would be wonderful. It's wonderful to see their faces. This is great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, well,
Well,
thank
Amy
you
and
very
Russ,
much.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
you.
for the presentation and for sharing the work over at CHIPS with us tonight.
Absolutely. Glad to do it. Thank you for having me.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
All right. Take care.
All right, I just need 1 second to transition.
Getting good, you got two computers going,
I'm trying.
multiple screens going.
Multitasking
Look
here,
at
I
that.
got all kinds of stuff going on.
At the end of this, all you need.
I can't end quick enough. Okay, yep, thank you very much. So yeah, as we go through our reports tonight, report number 2 on the agenda under new business is just our student learning model enrollment update. We had talked about this at the previous school committee meeting, and if you recall, over the course of the fall, we had originally asked parents to make a decision for their students with regard to what would be best to start the school year, either remote or hybrid, where they're in class 2 days a week and they're online 3 days a week. So after we started the school year, we did say we would try to find some natural breaks in the school year for people to be able to make a transition if they wanted to. And one of the natural breaks was after the first term. It obviously was a little bit different based on high school, middle school, and elementary school, but it all took place in early to mid-November. And we decided after Thanksgiving break, when we came back, is when we would make the learning model transitions. So this is the information you have. Obviously, we do from time to time get a student or two here or there that moves, but at this point, these are the numbers based on coming back right after, oh, actually, I'm sorry, so we did do the transition in November, but these are actually numbers that are valid as of January 2nd, as far as our enrollment goes. When we get to our regular district enrollment in the next report, you'll see it's gone down slightly over last year, and we'll talk about that then. But as our percentages hold, we're relatively consistent at the elementary and the middle school. We were always about 2/3 who wanted the remote instruction, and a third who wanted to be, hybrid, and a third that wanted to be remote. At the high school level, it was slightly higher in the beginning. We were up closer to 70%. I don't think we were quite there, but that is the one group that we did see some people transitioning out of hybrid to remote for a number of different reasons. But we still have, 60%, a little over 60% of our population at the high school who has chosen the hybrid model. So as of, actually over the weekend, these were the numbers, and I just wanted to share that with you, just to keep you in the loop with regard to the models that people are selecting.
Anybody have any questions on it, Donna?
This is just as a follow-up to this, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate here or after your report, Dr. Hirsch, but at the high school level in particular, can we get a sense of how many kids are attending regularly, like what the attendance report is, and by class? And the reason I mentioned by class is some kids, this is my experience anyway, they don't show up for their first couple classes, but then they make it to the last part. They may sleep in or something like that. I don't know if that's the case with our kids. The other is, I think there's been a lot of talk about the increased failure rate. And this is not just I don't even know if it's in Chelmsford, but certainly across the state and across the country. And are we seeing that as well? So just those two pieces of information. So we're coming up on this mid-year in a couple weeks.
Correct.
So right after that, maybe, if we could take a look at that.
Yeah, I mean, the academic grades is something we obviously can look at. I'm not concerned about that. The hard part is the attendance this year, because I would have to just see how all the coding in the system would come out in a report, because we're reporting people basically, whether they're in person or they're remote, they're reported to the state as still being present. So it's either like physically present or virtually present. So I think what we have seen is someone who, say, is a remote learner, who for a particular day, maybe they're not feeling well, maybe they were nervous about coming in after a particular day or whatnot, they might go remote for the day.
Okay.
So I think when we pull the report, it's still going to show them as being present. It's just they would be present in a different learning model than they selected. I just don't know how that data is going to come out.
I'm less worried about them because I know that they're present in some form or
Yeah.
fashion. It's the kids who may not be showing up at all. And I don't know if that's a problem in
Oh, like
Chelmsford.
a true absence?
A true absence, like if our absence rates have increased.
That
as a
would be
result.
relatively easy to look at.
Yeah,
It would be
it's- I'm not
difficult
worried
to
about that other
distinguish
stuff.
between virtually present
By
and
class, it might be
physically.
too difficult to look at because it would be so much data.
Yeah, no, let me clarify. I meant flat out absent.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you know,
Right.
or, you know, do we have kids, you know, like, we see a trend where, you
Right.
know, the early part of the day or the last part of the day, I mean, that's a problem too sometimes. That, you know, we're seeing a drop off in attendance.
Right.
I'm more worried about the flat out just not showing up than I am about, you know, attending some classes and not
Right.
others.
Let me see what I
because,
can
you know,
tease out of the
yeah.
system.
'Cause it has been, I think it's been identified as an issue, you know, as I said, across the state and the country, both failure rate and attendance rate.
Yeah, I have to say, and again, I have heard that, you know, statewide and even nationally, I don't think, you know, we're really experiencing it to the level that a lot of other communities, or even statewide and nationally, may be experiencing. Let me see how we can get that absent data out of the system, whether it's by, you know, day. I think the high school still
Yeah.
kind of has that
They
two-day
do it.
schedule going
They
now.
do, they have like it's an A, B, C, D, E, F, G plus.
Right.
So.
And then that repeats on
Oh,
Thursday and
And then
Friday,
it repeats
correct?
on
Right,
on
right.
Wednesday, they go all sections, and then
Right.
they
Yeah,
repeat
so that
that same.
complicates it too.
Right,
Yeah.
but we'll see what we can pull out.
Okay.
Yeah, let me see what we can tease out. And, yeah, maybe this, when is the true second quarter at the high school ending?
February, I don't have the date off the top, but it's
First week
February
in February?
something, yeah,
All right, let me see what we can do on that, and
it's coming up.
that we can do.
Yeah, if there's a time to intervene, if we have time to intervene in some way, then I'd like to be able
Right.
to
Yeah,
do that.
and they're looking at academic data at the same time, like DNF lists and stuff like that. That's stuff that will
Right.
continue to be pulled.
Right, yeah, I know our teachers are following up, our deans, guidance
Mhm.
counselors, everybody's following up, but.
And are you most concerned at the high school?
Yeah, I really am, because, you know, for a couple of reasons, because of graduation requirements and because of MCAS.
Okay, all right, let me just see what we can get out pretty easily, and I can get back to you for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Anything else on the learning models at this point? My question would just be, are we looking at some other point in time where we'll give people the option of changing learning models again?
Yeah,
On the end?
I don't know that we'll actually have like another official date where they have to. A lot of our schools at this point in time, I do think the majority of people have kind of honed in on what's working for them. You know, one of the issues we will have, let's say we do have a student who's remote, who is struggling, and the school might convene a TAT-type meeting to be able to talk through the struggles. If it's identified that the student would really perform better, or maybe better serviced in person, then we'll be making those switches as long as there's room in the classroom for the student to be able to come in based on the need. Alternately, you know, we do have some people who leave the district, we have other people who come into the district, and it really is based on space at this point in time, if we can accommodate an additional in-person student in a class, because we don't want to go mixing up students and teachers, and we're kind of locked into the homeroom structure and the classroom structure that we have. So a lot of it is kind of be done on like a one-off at this point, but we're not hearing big demands for program changes. If we did, I could come back to you and we could do something similar to what we did in Thanksgiving, but I really do think most of it's being handled now at the school level if there are issues.
Right, anything else on the learning models? Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, it's not finalized yet, and this is our next report of the evening. This is our October 1 student enrollment report. So we always have to transmit our student data based on October 1 to the state. It's a kind of a hard number, and then this is the figure that they'll use when they're doing all the different aid calculations, whether it's Chapter 70 aid or different grant programs, whether they're competitive or they're allocation grants. They oftentimes use the October 1 data to be able to make those decisions about quantifying awards. Now, for us, you will see, and I made note here, we do have slightly less students overall in the district this year compared to last year for a couple of different reasons. Number one, say on the younger grade, the kindergarten level, we do have a handful of students who would have registered for kindergarten who have delayed a year. So that is a factor that we're contending with. We have had some students in the district end up removing for the year. to either enroll their students in private or parochial schools, oftentimes just because of the options for more in-person learning. Those are the two big ones. We also did see a good number of students decide to homeschool this year, over twice as many as we would typically in a school year. So I do think that all these students eventually will come back to us when we're able to reopen for school. So that is the good news. There has been no official word from the state with regard to how they're going to handle these declines in enrollment. This is not unique to Chelmsford. This is happening in districts across the state, and actually the urbans are disproportionately impacted by this. I would tend to believe, just based on my history with this, that they'll do some kind of a hold harmless type provision with state aid for this year, where everyone is guaranteed at least the state aid in fiscal '22 that they received in '21. I don't see significant cutbacks in aid, which is positive for us. And I really do think for us, this is an issue of a 1 year kind of decline. I want to say it was about 200 kids overall off of last year. This has been transmitted to the state. It is just taking longer to kind of certify this year. I don't see this changing much from what we've submitted, but I always do take the step to basically, in the second page of my report, break down for you by school and by grade level, how many students we have, just so that we can track it over time. And then lastly, at the elementary and the middle school level, because it's a little bit easier, although these aren't perfect homeroom sizes, we take the number of students per grade level and divide it by the number of homerooms we're operating in each of the different schools. So for argument's sake, if we just look at the Byam School in kindergarten, they have 82 students who are enrolled in October 1. We did have 5 sections. It's very difficult to look at the data this year because that's a low number, obviously, but a lot of these numbers are skewed a bit because we do have fully remote classrooms and we have hybrid classrooms, so you're going to see smaller numbers than you usually would in a school year. We had basically staffed our kindergartens across the district. We had to this year at 5 sections each, and we normally would we start the year with 4. Usually 1 or 2 of our schools necessitate us going to 5. We actually had to go to 5 across the board based on the numbers, and then we did end up having a number of students, again, either decide to go private parochial, to hold back for the year, so that's why some of those numbers are low. We weren't in a position to then remove a classroom and try to reconfigure. But you'll see right across the board, elementary-wise, we have very good homeroom numbers, mid to high teens, right to the low 20s, basically, like I said, across the board at the 4 schools. This is also potentially helpful to you as we start to build the budget for next year, because you can see, I just noticed the water drip.
Yeah.
You can see the number of sections that kind of trickle up through the school system. So like at this point in time, actually, it's interesting. Harrington actually is a 5-strand school. So adding those modular classrooms a couple of years back obviously has really paid off for us, because we're actually operating 5 full classrooms, 1 across the board at each of those schools. Byam a couple of years ago, and again this year, they have 3 out of their 5 sections have to operate with 5. So you definitely do see those little spikes in number. And again, for the first time, actually, South Row, we had to add a 5th section. They haven't had to add a 5th section previously, so we had to add that K class. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with our numbers, again, year over year. But I find this helpful, and I wanted to share it with you. On the second page was our middle school breakdown. So we're at the point, this is our first year actually, that we have some symmetry between the 2 programs as far as we don't have that split team
Yeah, split team.
at McCarthy anymore. We're actually operating 8 full sections at both Parker and McCarthy. And you can see in our middle schools, our numbers are in the low to mid-20s overall, which is, again, I think desirable. And these also do include all of your separate programs in the base number. So oftentimes there are some students who might be in a substantially separate program who, for the purposes of this report, are included as part of the homeroom numbers, but in all actuality, they may be in a substantially separate program during the course of the day, and they're really not included here. Some students here also might get pulled for L services, things along those lines. So your true homeroom numbers for instructional purposes is slightly less, but for the purposes of this report, I think year over year it kind of depicts what's happening, and it's a good look at the numbers. This is obviously not able to be produced for the high school, just because of the pure size of the high school and the number of classes. We do a class-by-class look back on that. But we'll be using the high school data when we formulate the fiscal '22 budget, and we'll produce more information for you on that in the coming weeks. So while not certified, I'm pretty confident that these are going to be the numbers. Again, I'm not overly concerned. We did go down a couple hundred students, but all districts have, and I really do not think this is going to negatively impact our state aid. We just have to wait for the figures.
Questions?
One of the things that popped out at me when we look at the middle school class numbers is it is higher than what happens at the elementary. And when we're going to look at what Dr. Hirsch is presenting tonight and correlating one to the other, I don't think the middle schools are doing as well as the elementaries in terms of the performance. And it concerns me that, the numbers are also higher in the classrooms. Now, I understand that there are students who may have a different program that they go to and so on, but that does impact the classroom as well, because you've got movement in there, you've still got to control what's going on in the classroom and make sure everybody's learning. So in relation to that, I'm thinking, I'm trying to correlate both and make sure that performance does keep up at the middle school level, which I think is extremely important, and a place where we can lose students and that love of learning very easily. That's one thing I'm watching. The other thing to bring in about the numbers is that Route 110 development, that 1 year enterprise and so on.
Right.
I've been kind of keeping an eye. It looks like that first phase is done, but it doesn't look like it's occupied. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But, those three things are like 84 units. It's a substantial number, and it's multi-bedroom. It's
Right.
not just one bedroom unit. So to keep an eye on that as well, and I think that impacts Byam, right?
Yeah, for an elementary school, that would impact Byam. I have not been out there lately to see growth-wise, but that one is on our radar. We would have to take a tact similar to what we did with kind of Center and South Row. Remember when there was that development, just forget the name of it, on
Yes.
Turnpike that came up, that was technically in the Center District? Yeah, the Center District. But when we look at the Center numbers, they were obviously creeping higher than South Row's. South Row had more capacity, and our buses already go Turnpike anyway to be able to get to South Row. So what we had to do when that development came online is actually kind of, even though it's in the Center District, we identify a development and kind of move it to a different district, so that one would be identified as the South Row district. We may have to do something similar to the Byam one.
Yeah.
Not to the Byam one, to the one on 110 that would feed Byam when we get there, because obviously we don't have a lot of room at Byam in certain grade levels for growth.
Right.
If I do recall, though, and I'll confirm this for you, I thought at least the first phase, or if not phase and a half of that development, were largely studio and one-bedroom apartments. I don't believe it was going to impact a lot of students. I think students may have come in the second or third phases of the development, but I will look into that for you. We have not seen an uptick at Byam enrollment-wise. Again, I just don't know how much is happening because we're in kind of the pandemic climate in a normal school year, but it is something that we're watching.
Yeah, it's not a normal year, and construction is impacted by it too.
Right.
And movement of people, and occupancies, so, but that is coming our way, and it's something to keep in mind. The middle school performance, though, I think is also something for us to think about, and consider as we go forward as a committee, and making sure that that keeps up and that the numbers don't have a huge impact on it.
I think we'd have to take a look at numbers and other factors, and
Right.
not the least of which is the developmental stage that kids are in at that particular
Right.
time. Because I think that there's a variety of things, and maybe, I don't know if we can, as time goes on, kind of flush that out a little bit about what seems to be, the cause for, lower performance. The other thing too is, and I don't know if you're gonna address this at all, but, elementary is one type of learning. When we get to middle school, then we're beginning to get into, a different type of learning, and, I think that sometimes there's maybe a little bit of a lag for kids, in terms of, developing those skills. So I think that there's a lot of things to consider. I think numbers is certainly one of them, but I think that there are others, and, maybe that's something we could talk about in the future. What do we need to do
Yeah.
to support kids in those school years?
And I think some of that conversation does kind of go into the presentation a little bit,
Right.
and we could certainly follow up then too.
Other questions on the enrollment report? You mentioned that you're hoping that they're gonna put through some sort of hold harmless.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do as a committee is there anybody we can reach out to support that or push for that? I don't know who that would go through, and
I mean, I think the natural one would be like your state reps, to really make sure that they're in the loop with what's happening. I think, usually the end of January, February is when we're gonna start to get a sense for what the governor is gonna recommend funding-wise. You then start taking a look at the House budget, a couple of months later. What I would say is, maybe Monday night, we're gonna talk about it later, but Monday night, we do have a tri-board meeting to talk a little bit about fiscal '22 budgeting. I know Town Manager Cohen is involved at the state level too, to find out, what kind of leads he has on what next year is gonna look like. I'm kind of monitoring that from the school side. Why don't we have the presentation Monday night, and as a kind of tri-board, talk about our outlook or what we think might be happening. And then we could always, at our next meeting in January, perhaps draft a letter that we could get circulated around the committee, get some support for, and at least, put our state legislature on notice that, these are the kind of priority items for us. These are the issues that we're gonna be dealing with in the budget cycle, and we at least wanna flag it for them. And then we can get that out right by the end of January. Again, even the governor's budget's not gonna come out until after that. So the House will get it well in advance of any deliberations that they're gonna have. But I think this is gonna be a pretty consistent theme, community to community. Everyone's gonna be looking for that minimum aid. So I think it should in the end work out okay for us.
I agree. I think, we have to kind of hone in their focus a little bit. I mean, everything's just been so broad because there's been so many issues, not the least of which is what's happening at the national level. So I think that, as we get through the month of January and into February, I think you have to kind of, like I said, draw their focus a little bit to some of the issues that we find important as a district would be good.
Right, great.
Is this include, this report on the numbers includes these, the enrollment statistics?
Yeah, I just gave you the backup.
Okay.
Because I produced a report based on the DESI report. So it's overkill, but I just gave you the backup that I used to produce a report.
These were actually interesting in terms of the breakdown of the population that I have been working with a bit, the English language learners. And it looks in total you had 205 and recently arrived 40 out of the 205. Do you know what the definition is of recently arrived? I'll ask Kelly if
For the L's
that's.
for this year, do you happen to know?
I don't have the
Okay,
total number.
I'll follow up with her.
No, the number was, for this period on October 1, it's 40. I just don't know what the look-back period is
Yeah.
to identify, I don't know what the look-back period is to qualify as a recently
Yeah,
arrived. We can find out for you.
Yeah.
okay. I can ask too.
Okay.
It's interesting for us because we're working more now. We have our board and so on, and we're gonna
Right.
meet, and we're gonna be looking to see what the EL Council can also do in terms of the adults in the group, to bring parents more into the fold.
Sure.
And one of the things we've been asked for quite a bit is English as a second language for adults.
Okay.
So just a thought that if you have 40 that are recently arrived and that English is that important.
Oh, right.
Maybe think about asking the community center to also offer an English as a second language course here in our community, rather than having to go out. And that is something so we'll present that, but that was one of it's interesting on this breakdown.
Yeah, the other thing you might want to share with your group too, I mean, this is like the district summary sheet that say has the 205, but there are all the individual school breakdowns behind it.
Right.
So you can actually kind of look year over year, or just to get a sense for if you have a newer population within a school. I have not looked, but even of the 40 new, I mean, if you ever saw, say, 10 in one particular school, you might want to target
Yeah.
some extra assistance or help.
And when we look at this EL population in a particular school, does that include the students that the teacher usually is following who have exited the program in terms of, it includes those students?
All students.
All students, okay, thank you.
Yeah, the total L would be all.
Okay, it's included in that.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions on enrollment? Okay, all right.
Thank you. Next item up the agenda this evening is just a kind of a continued conversation on our, and again, no action necessarily has to be taken tonight, but just on our high school athletics for the year. I know we talked a little bit at our last meeting about how our teams, this is about the middle part of December, started to do their tryouts and practices. As a Merrimack Valley group, we decided that we weren't going to begin competitions until the earliest next week, which would be January 11th. I think most teams at this point have actually done very well through the tryout phase. They've been able to manage any, kind of COVID cases that they've had, properly quarantine, be able to stay functioning. And we, the superintendent group, is going to be meeting again on Friday. We meet weekly to kind of take a look at the data in the different communities, make sure that it's advisable for us to be competing. So that will all be happening. And I think we should be fine for, hopefully the next week or two as we start the season. This is a relatively short season because this is that kind of, the winter season is falling between now and February vacation. So it's only a little over a month for all the different competitions. I know we're going to approach it very safely. And hopefully for the foreseeable future, we'll be offering in-person learning so we won't have to make a decision. But I just did want to again flag for you that in the event that we ever had to go fully remote at the high school, because of a COVID spread type situation, the committee would have to vote to authorize sports to continue if it were going to. That came down from MIAA and DESE, so that would be your decision at that point in time. Obviously, if something were to happen on a week-to-week basis, I have just been managing that. This would be a bigger decision for the committee if you were going to allow it to happen. I would obviously, at that point, if it were a COVID issue or a spread issue, I would be recommending to you that we do not compete. Ultimately, you would either have to vote to approve or to disapprove of that. But I'd want to leave the door open personally, that if we had to close the school for a non-COVID, related issue, let's say it happened to be more of a staff issue that we were confronting, and we didn't have, COVID spread within our teams and were able to compete, I'd want to leave the door open and at least have that discussion. So again, I'm just kind of bringing this forward, flagging it for you so it doesn't come as a surprise if it ever had to be addressed. You don't need to vote at this point if you don't want to, and you don't really need to because we're not dealing with that situation. But again, just wanted to put it on the agenda to keep the conversation going.
Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Have there been any cases that have come out of the tryouts or practices?
Yeah, we did have a case. I honestly forget which team it was, but there was a team that was affected with one of the tryouts, so they did have to stop tryouts and quarantine the group that was trying out until the quarantine period was over, and then they were able to actually continue and go ahead with the tryouts. So it does happen, very similar to even in school we could have a case. I think a lot of it is really important on the contact tracing, which is so critical, and the fact that we are quarantining, we're making people quarantine, they're going for testing, we're not seeing the spread. So even in the athletic case, if we have a student on a team that does test positive, when we quarantine the team, we isolate them, they go for their tests 5+ days into the event. We have not had further kids on that team test positive. I'll tell you myself, I was over at the high school doing a walk around just to check the facility over the Christmas break, and the basketball teams were both practicing in the gym. I thought they were doing a great job of staying, they were running line drills, but they were staying distant from each other. They all had masks on. No one had to tell them to put masks on. I mean, they were doing a very respectable job with that.
Kids are so much better than adults.
What's that?
Younger adults and kids
Young
are
adults.
so much better.
Yeah,
about masks.
but they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And you could see just, in their eyes, because you can't see the whole face, but you could just see that, they're enjoying what they're doing, and I don't think they want to blow it. So I really do feel that they were being careful, they were being cautious. Again, the cases that we've had have been basically kind of brought in from the outside. They have not been cases that have been spreading within the school. And I think the evidence of that, and I am going to have a report for you at the next meeting in January that kind of looks at our data from the fall, right up through the Christmas break, about the number of cases we had, the number of contacts we identified, the testing results from all of those, just to kind of assure you and the community also that it is safe for us to be, still in school and conducting programming, that we are not seeing spread within our schools. I think town-wide, we're certainly seeing an increase in COVID numbers. I think the one big change that I've observed since the beginning of the school year is early on, if you would have a family member in town test positive, more often than not, the rest of the person would isolate, the rest of the family was not testing positive. Now we are seeing more familial kind of clusters. So it's more likely now if a member of your family does test positive that it is spreading within the family. But I really do have to give our families credit, our staff and students, that if someone within the family, is not feeling good, the people are staying home. Really, for the most part, they're not coming in to infect others. The cases where we have had to, within a school setting, quarantine, put classes out, have largely been due to asymptomatic individuals. So an asymptomatic student ends up getting tested, or a staff member gets tested, ends up having COVID, not even knowing it. We have to do the look back and quarantine. But again, we're not seeing the spread. We're not having basically anyone come up in those groups to test positive, which again, it speaks to the 6 feet we have going, the masks, the hand washing, right down the line. So we're being super, super conservative and cautious in our protocols. It is working. We're not seeing that spread.
So I'm sure this has come up with health and everybody else, but
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys read that there is a more virulent strain that came out of the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was actually found in New York, I think, yesterday. So, I mean, it's a discussion that has to probably be had, that if it's 70% more transmissible, how does that affect everything? So, and the vaccines aren't really coming as fast as we thought they were going to, so.
Right.
Anyway.
All right, any questions? Yeah, Donna?
Dr. Lang, it references athletic competition, but it doesn't say anything about practice.
Right. The directions from the DESE is basically whether you're going to allow your team to compete in, say, for us it's the MVC, in MVC sanctioned events. Even DESE leaves the door open for the ability to practice if you want to then be able to compete. It really depends on how, I guess, drastic the numbers are within your community and even within, say, your sports community. Obviously, if you had, let's say we didn't have any spread or any cases on a team, but the high school had to shut down for COVID, staffing, whatnot. It leaves the door open for you to be able to allow practices to continue, not compete, to continue to keep a team ready to once, let's say the numbers do improve, you'd be then ready to go back to compete. The vote is primarily about whether you're going to compete with other districts or other schools. And again, like throughout the fall and even as we prepare for the winter, those have been decisions primarily we've been making on a week-to-week basis among the just the schools. We've been very upfront with each other about different cases or concerns, or if you do happen to have a team that had someone that was contagious or questioned, we have no problem just pulling that team out of competition for the week, adding a makeup week to the end of the season. So those have been kind of week on, week off decisions. This would be more of a widespread issue. Again, my personal thing would be, if it ever got to be that bad that we had to close the school, we're not going to allow out-of-district competition. We're probably not going to allow practicing. But again, it just doesn't shut the door because there are so many things that have been coming up this year that you just can't plan for, or events that at least you could have the discussion at the time.
How's this, is the scheduling going to work like in the fall? Are you going to go against the same team in the same week?
They're
Kind
trying.
of home and away?
Yeah, they're
type thing?
trying.
Okay.
They're trying to keep everything as much as they can together.
Okay.
The other couple complications with some of the winter sports is you do have more joint teams than we had in the fall with some sports, like hockey. We have a joint girls team with us and Billerica. I know Drake and Tingsboro, I think, have a joint I don't know if it's boys or girls, but they have a joint hockey team. So you have a little more of that. Oh, do they do it too? Okay. So that's going to be interesting, because now we really have to kind of be watching and be very close with both communities. But yeah, for the most part, they are trying to do a whole school on a particular week, a weekday.
Right?
I've read that some communities and some school districts actually are testing regularly for sports and participation in sports. Is that something that we can participate in? Is it something we can look into to possibly participate in?
I hadn't heard about that for sports.
Yeah.
I saw in the news, I don't know if it was Channel 4, 5, or 7, I was watching the other day, there was a district that was making, it seemed like it was a bigger district, it was an urban district, it might have been Salem, or somewhere up on the north.
Salem is one for sure. They do test. It's the saliva test.
But I think it was more than just athletics, I think it was like,
Well,
they
they're
were
doing,
making it available to everyone.
but for athletics, you have to. I know with them, you have to.
Okay,
I'm not sure, there were a couple that I read about. Salem was one of them as well. But is that something that's just being offered to these districts by?
You had to apply. There's 80 districts that were chosen to participate. I think it's.
Is that one
Abbott,
of them?
Phoenix Now.
well, that's different.
Yeah, it's through DESE.
No, but
and,
that's different.
Well, actually, it's being overseen by the Department of Health and Human Resources Services.
Yeah, that's not a preventative test though
Oh,
for
no, not
athletics.
preventive. Yeah, this was, but I guess you could, this is the one that you had to meet certain criteria to
Right.
enter into this, and they just completed phase 1 of
Yeah.
this testing, and Salem was in that.
Is one of these? Okay.
But the Salem very well may have been, but
Yeah.
I know that the city of Salem, just because of the size, they also have, like, similar to Lawrence and similar to Lowell,
Yes.
they have like the citywide testing, and I know that
Uh-huh.
they did some kind of a special thing where they already had the labs there, where they opened it up for the school people to be able to do the testing. I just don't have all the details on it. The other program you were talking about, it's a specific test that would be more applicable to like someone who is symptomatic.
Right.
It's not really gonna grab people who are asymptomatic, and I think that'd be my bigger concern with, say, the athletes. People feeling good, not even knowing that they may have something, and then having it.
There was a cohort 2, a collaborative over the summer. I think it was 12 different communities, and it was actually spearheaded by a Wellesley parent.
Oh.
And they got together and got free testing through the labs in that particular area. But it was only a 3-month pilot program. I'm not sure if it's continued on, but basically it was to help offset the cost to
Right.
the districts and the families
Yeah.
for these tests, so.
I'm gonna be curious to see, the good and the bad news is obviously I support testing and we wanna get people tested as much as we can. There can sometimes be a false sense of security though, if you get a test and then you feel like you're negative and you're okay on, say, Tuesday, but then, if you don't watch what you're doing or you end up, somehow becoming infected Wednesday, Thursday, Friday before a game, that's not gonna necessarily help you. I am hoping that there is going to be something, now that we're getting a little bit of federal money to the state level, and then hopefully kicked out to the cities and towns, to do more of a, almost like they had at Showcase Cinema going up to Thanksgiving time. Anyone could drive in, it's like they have at Lawrence now, and kind of be checked. I'm hoping that more of those sites are going to start to open up. If you happen to know of the school system that specifically did something with athletics, though, I don't mind if you tell me the name, or I can poke around a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't mind
It would-
calling and seeing.
It would be good to know more about that, only because one of the biggest concerns I have lately is the lag time. I mean, we're being notified 8-9 days after an exposure, that, and I don't know if is it because of the testing site? Is it because people are leaving it too long to go get tested? But, the lag time is pretty large, and adding in more potential exposures because of the sports or, whatever activities are going on, not necessarily just sports. It would be nice to have the ability to test on a regular basis. It's every week on this day, and you get tested.
Right. I can do a little legwork for you. If you happen to hear of a community, though, a
I
name,
will.
if you let me know. But I can ask Dan, our athletic director, if he's heard anything through, I don't think anyone in the MVC is doing it, but I can ask him if he's heard anything on that front, and we can follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on sports? So hopefully they get the season underway next week and.
I'm hoping they're
everything
able
goes
to
well,
start,
and,
you know, everyone seems to be excited. I think if they really, again, just kind of keep their eye on the prize, being able to play, and again, I witnessed good distancing and kids taking it very seriously, young men and women.
It's true.
So hopefully if they can keep that going, we'll have a successful season.
Well, do we need to vote tonight? Because, I mean, my only concern is that, you know, we're gonna see that possibly an uptick in numbers because of, you know, the Christmas vacation and whatnot. And I don't wanna get caught, you know, a week out or a week and a half out, not having given some direction to, you know, people in terms of what it is that they need to do. I don't know what you think.
I guess what would you be voting on tonight, though?
The recommendation, what it is that you asked us that we would have to vote on in terms of suspending competition, if it was a community spread versus staffing issues.
Yeah, again, I don't, it's just so situational
Okay.
that, again, you certainly can vote if you wanted to make like a preemptive type vote to kind of like know a direction. But let's say we did actually see some kind of data in the district, and we're talking like a week to be able to hold over to a school committee meeting to kind of have a bigger discussion about it. I, for the week, could just say, listen, we're not gonna compete, I don't feel, and I have no problem doing that.
Okay.
Just say, listen, I don't feel comfortable, we're not gonna compete against so-and-so school district. Bump this week to the end of the season, and, you know, do makeup games then. And will we meet every other week? If we, like, actually had to take a vote, we could bring it in at that point in time
That's
and,
fine.
and make the decision.
Yeah, I just didn't wanna leave anybody kind of wondering what was gonna,
No,
you know, or, you know,
I guess the only thing, like, do you agree with that philosophy? That, you know, if we get to that point and this is the discussion we're having, are you kind of in line with that? Or do you disagree, or do you want me to be looking at other kind of, I guess, options? I don't want anyone to be caught off guard or be surprised if something happens.
I think, you know, the fall is a good model in that's, it's exactly what happened in the fall, is that there were schools that had little clusters outbreak, and they shut down that schedule for that week, you know. Again, I had the volleyball coaches in my room, and
Right.
they'd we're supposed to play Andover this week, but I guess we're not gonna play them, and they,
Right.
you know, they would end up playing Andover 2 weeks later. So I think, you know, again, the superintendents and principals were doing a pretty good job of letting each other know
Very
what's
good
going
job.
on, so.
I
very
agree,
good.
and I also think too, this is something I just actually was, I think I had it in my head, we would be suspending competition for the season as opposed to maybe a short period of time, and that's really what we're talking about, right? Is we're not talking about necessarily for the season, we're talking about for a period of time until, you know, everything is good to go again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could just cancel the season,
Yeah.
but I think you just want to get over that
Right,
period where
right.
it just wasn't like a good time to be
Right,
playing.
Yeah,
And like, even if you look at this season coming up, it's basically between now and February vacation. So it's not a real long season anyway, but we do ironically still meet at least 2 more times. So if something came up, you could kind of take that action at that point. And I was really, again, just kind of forecasting this for you, just so it didn't get caught off guard if we ever had to have that discussion.
And if it was you know, let's say the state shut down, that
Oh,
would
if the
just shut
state shuts
everything
it down, that's
Right,
kinda
that would just shut
supersedes
everything
everything,
down. So,
yeah.
I mean, if the governor says, you know, it's crazy, numbers are up there, you know, then.
Yeah,
it's a whole-
this is like a local control decision. So like if the state ever shut all our schools down, then we don't have any say in that, then we're all shut down. But this would just be if we preemptively closed the school, in this case, the high school, because of, say, COVID or whatnot, then in order to do extracurriculars and activities and athletics to be able to compete, you would have to vote to basically say you still feel it's safe for your students to be competing, even though you've closed your learning environment. That's kind of the kicker.
well, because I feel like I kind of mucked it up a little bit here, so we're talking about staffing versus a school community spread, and also for, not necessarily for the whole season, but for a period of time until it is safe for, competition to resume.
Yeah, I mean, technically,
Okay.
you could, and again, it's all situational.
Right, right.
You could vote to suspend, play for 2 weeks
Right.
to see what was gonna happen number-wise. And then when you reconvened, if you felt more comfortable, you could vote to allow participation to happen again. In the interim, you could decide whether you want to allow practice or not practice.
Right.
You really have the control.
Yeah, I'm okay with waiting, because I think now that I have it clearer in my head as to what it is that,
Yeah.
you know, what we're actually voting on, that's fine.
Okay.
Anything else on sports schedules, winter sports? Is fall 2 still a go? I haven't heard anything.
I haven't either.
Okay.
As of now, no,
Yeah,
is it fall two? What's that?
Fall 2, that's
Special season, is
that's
that
what they
what they're
call
calling
it.
it?
Yeah, fall 2.
Yeah, it's supposed to
That's
start
the football
the
and,
Monday after February
but they push with the
vacation.
track to it, and then they push swim, I don't know. crazy.
Unified basketball got pushed out.
Which did?
Unified
Oh,
basketball.
unified basketball,
did it
right,
really?
yeah. And is that fall too also?
It's supposed to be fall too.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I haven't heard anything
Nothing.
about it, and it's coming up in a month, you know,
Yeah,
month and a half.
it's, I believe the tryouts would be like the Monday after February vacation
Yeah,
for that one.
yeah.
Because that only runs until April vacation.
Right.
And, no, I do. I mean, I feel for everyone who's kind
Yeah.
of struggling with this because it's so tough to get all of these different sports, the ability to compete in such a short window. And it's gonna be cold, you know, at the end of February, so we'll have to see how that goes.
All right,
Oh, sorry. All right, thank you. So, again, if anything ever came up too, I would reach out to you directly, even on an interim basis, like all week if I had an issue. I'd call you, I'd text you, and let you know if we had to make some decisions. All right, next item on the agenda this evening, Linda is going to give a little bit of an overview of just an academic update. I know we talked at a previous meeting about kind of taking a look at some early data from last year compared to this year, just to get a sense for where our kids are. And I'll let you run us through that.
Yeah, so we were talking at the last couple of meetings about MCAS data, right? And we're going to be providing any testing for students. But one of the things that we do in this district in general is we don't wait for MCAS data just to inform how we're going to instruct students and support students, because it is summative data. So as a district, we rely on our benchmark data as well within what we provide students. And when I talk about benchmark data, there's a couple of things that, pop up. Obviously, our iReady program, and iReady is more of a diagnostic/adaptive program. So not only does it give us beginning of the year, middle of the year, and the end of the year data, it will also provide building block and instructional lessons for students, both at their instructional level, right, where they came in the diagnostic, but then also the teachers can assign specific standards that they're working on for students. So it has two components to it. It's not just a benchmarking system. But we also use DIBBLES, which is our dynamic indicators of basic literacy skills for students K1, as well as the RAN, which is the rapid automatic naming process. And that's a screener for predictor of early reading. Both of them do early reading. They do phonemic awareness pieces to it, but specifically the RAN is helpful for diagnosing any type of neurological disorders such as dyslexia, as we've discussed in the past. So that's important to us for placement for students, as well as seeing if we have to identify students early on as we go through. And the purpose of doing this presentation for you was to see, because I know, especially in the springtime and into the fall, there was a big concern of, have students regress? Do we know where they're at? How are we going to support them? So as a district, we've always had these in place. These aren't new programs to us, but I wanted to give you at least a little bit of an update of what's going on with beginning of the year data. We are starting our next benchmarking in the next couple of weeks. So like I talked about for iReady, it is a beginning of the year data that you have here, and it is our adaptive/supportive building block program. So I know that the slides sometimes can be a little bit smaller, so if you see, I left you some examples of the actual PDFs in front of you, if that's a little bit easier for you to look at. I think one of the things to keep in mind is on the left side was last year's beginning of the year data, and then this was this year's diagnostic that we gave, beginning of the year data. And what we're seeing right out of the gate is there isn't a big discrepancy between last year and this year, which is good, because that was, again, the big concern was, did our kids, fall back behind? So for example, even just looking at the ELA, iReady data, the Tier 1 students, which is the majority of your students. So if you remember, we have Tier 1 where all students, Tier 2 is a supportive tier for students that are not quite getting the original instruction, and then Tier 3, you're looking more at special education. So even for our ELA, we have the same percentage. 85% of our students are in Tier 1, which is where you want the majority of the students to be. There was 2% lower for Tier 2 and 2% higher for students that were at risk between 2019 and 2020. Okay? And same for when you look at iReady data, Tier 1 and Tier 2, from year 2019 to 2020, there's not a huge difference, with the majority of the students being in Tier 1, which is where you want them to go. So think of it as a green, yellow, and red system. Green is go, yellow is take pause. What are we going to do to provide support for those students? And red is students that are getting specialized services. So if you look at the iReady data for Tier 1 and Tier 2 at the different schools, you'll see that they are pretty much on point from where they were last year to this year. So we're not seeing significant regression in our students from the spring pandemic to the instructional models that we're trying to implement at this point. We're going to have some more information, obviously, as we give our next benchmarking, but this was, I think, a good news story for us, because everybody was kind of a little bit on, pins and needles of what are we going to do with students if they're significantly behind. If you take a look at the iReady mathematics, we saw similar results, right? So when it came for the math for Tier 1 students between the 2 years, there was a difference of 1%. Tier 2, same percentage that we had from 2019 to 2020, and then just an uptick of 1% for our students that were in the red zone, which would be the Tier 3. And again, looking at the 2 tiers of Tier 1 and Tier 2, because that's where all students are, they're receiving regular, regular ed services. There's not a significant change for our students for when it came to the mathematics iReady between the 2 years. So, with that being said, what I gave you here, and I didn't give this to you in your other packets, this is just a breakdown. This lets us know district-wide how many students need services and where we might need to give additional supports. However, teachers also have this for their classroom. So if I'm a teacher, and I obviously I stopped the graphics up there where it got to student's name, but underneath, it will tell the teachers what grade levels a student has actually tested out to, and then put them in specific groups. So after they've given this, or they've given them a lesson, they could look to say, okay, I still have 4 students that might need support, and I need to pull that group specifically. Same with the Tier 3. So this breakdown is for us district-wide, and this is an overview for you. But as a classroom teacher, once a student has received their diagnostic or received some type of a lesson, they can break it down to find out exactly where their students are and then who needs support. So it's a very helpful system, and then they can either use the adaptive programming that goes along with it, so students can continue on at their level, or if they want to target a very specific standard or domain for students, they could then assign lessons and work with those students. So it's a very helpful process. Moving on to DIBELS, which is, again, the dynamic indicators of basic literacy skills. We go through with teams of people to identify where the students are. This is actually helpful, too, for placement in their reading groups. And again, if you see the difference between, so this is kindergarten, so we only administer DIBELS in grades K and 1. If you look at kindergarten, the students, you're going to see a couple of things here, and I think it's important to explain. In 2019 through 2020, you can see where the kids were, and then we had to stop the testing. We did not do the end of the year last year due to the pandemic. That's why you're seeing a missing graphic there. But compared from this year at the beginning of the year to last year, the students are on point for DIBELS in kindergarten. So these are our current kindergartners at school compared to last year's kindergartners who are in first grade. You do see a significant difference, though, when it comes to first grade, and we've identified where that is, and we've put our interventionists there, because we did see a pretty, steep dip for our current first graders. And that's, it's not surprising to us in the sense of these are their formative years. This is really important, and there is a lot of regression that happens if students are not receiving the instruction that they need in these grade levels. So where we've identified where this situation is, we've put our interventionist in place to be working with those students so that we'll see what we're going to have in our next set of benchmarking. That's going to be important to us to see if we have to put in any additional supports and where these students are lying. And then when it came to the RAN, which is the Rapid Automatic Naming System, typically Chelmsford does stay in anywhere between the 8 and the 10% range of students that are below the 10th percentile. But breakdown for all kindergarten students in 2019 were 9% of the students that scored below the 10th percentile. And then we're seeing the exact same number here for 2020. And then for grade 1 students, there's a difference between 1% of students that fell below that 10th percentile. But then if you look back historically in data, we run anywhere between 8 and 10% of our students that fall below that 10th percentile. And we provide them support that is needed with our reading interventionists, and if there's anything significant from there, we'd have to refer them for special ed. And then for our other department, we do have additional benchmarking. These two are like our big programs, but at the elementary level, we have F&P benchmark assessment system for students, and again, that happens 3 times a year. For FOSS Science, they're still developing some of their assessments that are happening because FOSS is fairly new within the district. All the departments have common assessments. And IXL is almost a mirror program to iReady. iReady is a little bit more robust, but where IXL comes into place is, for example, iReady only goes till grade 8. Some of our students do max out of iReady, so we move them to IXL because that goes up into high school. And IXL is really moving forward with trying to have some assessments for science and social sciences and history. So we are going to be adopting that for next year for those programs to give them something beyond the common assessment that's created as a department. This will also give us an outside assessment so that we're prepared for anything that's coming forward. And this is just a snapshot. We have an assessment calendar. It correlates obviously with our MCAS when we have those dates. The F&P base that I just told you about. We also have writing prompts, and then we try to correlate that with our end of the year marking period so that teachers have a lot of data to move forward with and when they're doing their assessments and then doing their final report cards. So we have these for all the grade levels. This was just a quick snapshot. And that's what's happening for us in our testing situation at this point. We're, again, gearing up for the next set of assessments, which is going to be important to us to have this, beginning, the middle, and then the end is obviously the case. I know you were mentioning, where students are in the 2 middle schools. This is, again, beginning of the year data. It changes significantly towards the end of the year. What we want to do is see more green moving forward, and we typically do see that, obviously, with instruction that happens, because they're end of the year standards that they're being assessed on. So if you're a 6th grader and you do your diagnostic, it's what you should know by the end of 6th grade that we're testing you on. So to see like the majority of our students doing so well, that's a good thing, because we see that, little ticker tape go up, and it's more green towards the end of the school year because they're receiving the instruction from their students, if that makes sense.
Anybody questions on any of this?
We all look at Donna.
I'll just make a comment, and I was the one that asked about this, because I was worried, that
Yep.
over the spring, there was a lot of concerns about other kids missing a lot, are they gonna fall back a lot, and I look at the data, and it doesn't look like it, and I think that's a credit to what we did offer in the spring, that our teachers did a good job, keeping those skills up. I think it says a lot about the parents at home, doing their,
Doing
being
their part.
supportive, and the students, that they took it seriously, so I was actually very,
Yeah, we were kind of holding our breath a little bit, and then when the data started coming in, we felt, good about it, and then we could actually focus in on specific areas that we need to give some support to. One of the things that we have to remember too is, like, we put a lot in with our interventionists. We're changing our programming, obviously, the elementary level has put in 2 new programs for students. We're also adopting that program for middle school. We're looking at our standards, we're looking at our reporting system at the middle school to help with all of these things, and we've actually started to put interventionists at the middle school level, which we hadn't had in the past. So when we look at our grants and we look at our budgeting, we're actually putting in more supports for these students to support them. Middle school, and Donna's right, middle school is a different, it's just, I've taught it before, so that's why it's just a different developmental stage. It's a coming of age stage, and you have to remember, we still have our 5th and 6th graders in our middle school, and they're still young, but then you get to 7th and 8th graders, and that's when they get their first time with, like, schooling as we all know it. You have your separate teachers. It's a little bit more high school-ish. They get the textbooks. They feel all, important. So, and they're coming of age and very much aware of the social aspects that go around with that. So there's many facets that go into teaching a middle school student. And academics, obviously, is something that we have to focus in on, as well as the social emotional piece. But we're putting these pieces in place. We're going to hopefully see some additional success with the programs that we have set up for our students.
I'm sorry.
In the past, we used to see that 7th grade was kind of that really difficult year as they were transitioning. Is it still 7th grade, or is it?
It's always, yes, it is always going to be 7th grade. As a former 7th grade teacher, Jeff knows too, that's a big transition year for them. Even for kids with a lot of support at home and academics are in place, they become very, very aware of the social pieces that are happening to them at the same time. And they, it's tough.
Could you talk a little bit about the academic or the learning transition that's happening at that point too?
Yep.
Because we're going, I don't want to say, I mean, it's so different. I don't want to say rote, but I think you understand what I'm getting
It's
at.
more traditional.
Yes. Okay.
So your 5th and 6th grade students, again, they've come from elementary school with one teacher that's teaching all the, 4 subject areas that they're used to having. Then they move to a 2-person team, right? 2 teachers one teacher that's teaching the math and science, the other one that's working with the ELA and social studies. Now you go to middle school and you have 4 separate academic teachers as well as all your specialist teachers. They sometimes see upwards of 7 different instructors a day. And they're following a schedule with 2-minute transitions, and they gotta go really fast, and they have to get to lunch and everything else. It's very, they're used to a little bit more of the, team support. They still are on teams at middle school, but you have 4 people that have different content areas and different needs that they have to address for the students, and working together, it can be somewhat overwhelming. The academics actually really tick up for like the reading that needs to be completed, the writing requirements, and then any of their project requirements. It's really a team effort because kids can get really bogged down with, a lot of work that needs to get done. So you have to keep that piece in mind as well to make sure that you're covering what needs to be done, but then also supporting them.
Instructionally, things have changed so much over the years. I mean, we see this, in kindergarten, all I can think about is, I see kids doing writing prompts now. When my kids were in kindergarten, we were doing shapes, so it's really, things have changed quite a bit.
No, kids' academics is really ramped up, and, and it is more, when you do dig it to 7th and 8th grade, it does have a little bit more of a traditional feel to it, depending on rather than the project maybe based piece to it, it's gonna be a little bit more independent work.
Right, and I think that also too is that, and again, I hate to use the word rote, but, because we are doing critical thinking, all the way through, but then it just takes on, the volume and the depth.
Yep.
I think really changes later in middle school in terms of, what it is that we'll be looking for. We're looking now with all this information that you have gathered over the years, now take it and apply it. And I think that's a different type of learning and a different type of experience for kids at that age. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. No, you're right. It is.
So I think that's something that I think that we have to take into account as well.
Yeah, they're still young, but they are just, like I said, going through a lot of changes.
So when we look, you okay? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't want to
absolutely.
interfere.
I just wanted to kind of.
Just want to try to make sure I understand. In this report that we have right here, and we're looking at the reading between 2019 to 20 and then 2020 to 2021. When you look at the 2 middle schools combined, about 39% of the kids are in yellow or red together, 39% in 2019 to 20. And then in 20 to 21, you're looking at 49% when you combine both the yellow and the red. That's a pretty high amount for reading. Because one of the other concerns I have is when you think about reading, we're only starting now to do that RAM type of thing to figure out the ability to,
Right, these students probably had
read
not
and so on.
received.
These kids are already in middle school. So it would seem to me that more and more, we've got to get those interventions in there, or they're going to be moving on to high school with some issues here that are going to be very difficult to deal with, because this is about reading. In the math, we seem to be a bit better in terms of the middle school, but is there any way that we can look to see? I understand about the maturity and so on. I'm not that far off in terms of having been at the middle school level. And for some students, it's actually not the 7th grade, it's the 8th grade. Or sometimes, they're getting more mature quicker. or less quickly, it depends. But anyway, that middle school is different, and the social emotional component of it and so on is all very important. But this is pretty high when you look at the combination.
Well, you added them together, you
But
can't
yeah,
do that. That
you-
mathematically, you
Okay,
can't
well,
do
you
that.
look
The
at,
end
you
gets
look at the
higher.
yellow, then you're at 19% in year 2019 to 20, and in red, you're at 20% in that year. And then you
Yeah,
go
but
to
you're
the,
adding the two schools together. You can't, because
and why can't I? They're both
you're doing
middle
it out of
schools.
200%. So you're saying 49% are, so in McCarthy, it's 22% if you're gonna add the two together, and then, well, it's 17%, and Parker's 22%. If you can't add them up and say it's 38%, because that's 38% of 200.
Okay, fine, so, but it's still very high amounts at
No, I'm
each
just
one of
saying,
these
but-
schools.
But mathematically,
And
it's
you're-
not as high as
And
you.
you're looking at the fact that, to get this corrected is now much more difficult, because you've got, the grade level that you're at. So if we can also maybe think about looking into the earlier years to see, what's happening here when they transition, that it gets to this point.
We also have, we go from 4 elementary schools to 2 middle schools.
Right.
Correct.
Right, so, I think that, I don't know if that affects the numbers at all, do you know what I'm saying? So it's not quite as spread out, I guess, over.
Yeah, it's kind of hard,
Several
because you also have
schools.
different programs going into different
Right,
schools. Some schools are
exactly.
housing different programs. But we are doing, but so to your point, we are doing that type of work in the younger years. This is why we moved to Foundations, which is a very, specific phonics program rather than more of a whole language type of phonics program. This is why we went into a new reading program. This is why we changed all the standards at the elementary level, and we're in the process of doing the same piece of how we report out the standards. We're doing the exact same thing in at the middle school level, right? Because we're seeing these, where are these gaps? What's happening? And in order to do that, you got to kind of dig deep into to what's happening data-wise. We're bringing in a new reading program for grades 5 and 6, which is going to mirror the elementary. So it's going to take us a few years to see the benefits of all of this stuff. We are bringing in interventionists. So to your point, yes, we see where the gaps are, but you have to come up with a certain, support system to do that, and that's going to, it takes us several years to do so.
Right. So,
I think Maria's, brings up a good point, though, and I think, especially as we're thinking about the budget, if there are things that the middle schools think, would be helpful to them to support these kids, then we should be talking about it,
Right.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It becomes, in the social emotional setting in the middle school, you become very aware of yourself as an individual. And so collaborative ways of maybe helping each other to get to a different level become much more difficult to implement. But it's, it's got to be something that we think about, how we're going to do it.
Yep.
So that we can continue to really get some good education into these great minds here.
No, I agree.
I will say too that, and I'm actually kind of sick of hearing myself say this in terms of how things look nationally. But what we're seeing is what the trends are nationally in
Yeah.
terms of the reading and math levels.
Yep.
And how they have been impacted by COVID.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other factors that come into play too, especially for your 7th and 8th grade students. I mean, you do see more mental illness kick in at that developmental age, right? This is when we're doing our surveys, our youth risk behavior survey. We're starting to see students that are having tendencies towards, harming themselves. So the social emotional piece actually supersedes the academic piece. If we don't get that in check, we can't help them. So you could have a student that was academically solid for many years. If there's any type of mental illness or any type of, self-harming pieces that come into play for students, they also, again, this is where they meet groups of friends. Lots of things happen that the focus actually sometimes shifts from the academic to the behavioral piece. And then once we get that in place, we see that the students can turn themselves around, especially when they get to the high school level. I mean, again, I don't think you ignore, like, okay, well, there's these things that happen. We are putting those in place. Like when we received our Title I money and we realized we could put the interventionist in at the middle school, because sometimes middle school does get forgotten, right? You put all this stuff into elementary, high school, oh my goodness, if you don't do this, this is how, the rest of your life is gonna be. then there's middle school, right? You know, and they are a very unique group. They're a very fun group, but there's a lot of things that happen to them at that point, and you just have to be prepared for everything. So we are putting those things in place, and I'm hoping to see the benefits too of all these programs that we've put in for students.
I do realize that last year, we, funded certain positions that increased supports in the middle school, including, the additional psychologist, and some more of the special ed type of positions that I think in the long run are going to help. I agree with that 100%. I think it'll help a lot, but I think this year, it's been hard to make that assessment and see how it's gonna help. It's gonna be more and more necessary next year as we transition out of this craziness, because there has been a huge impact on many people, and a foregoing of getting that help for the social and emotional, and socializing has been hampered even more.
Right.
So, yeah, I
A
understand
lot of things
that.
these kids look forward to have been taken away from them.
But, I've always thought that there was a little bit of a concern at the middle school level in making sure that we're keeping that level of learning up. And I think these numbers kind of show that that's happening here, even though it's a tremendously difficult year.
All right, anybody else on the academic report? All right, well, thank you for putting that
Yep,
together.
no problem.
Good to see,
Yeah, I was happy, that was like the big
Yeah.
push for it originally, is to make sure there was no backwards movement. Now we just need to move forward.
Great, thank you. Next report this evening is just a capital plan update. I want to thank Jeff for serving as the school committee's liaison to the capital plan, did a great job again. So the capital plan, we had a couple of preliminary meetings, and then right before the holiday break, we met to kind of prioritize the list of projects. And we had rank ordered our projects, and in the end, 7 of our projects, 7 of the top 8 projects were proof of funding, just ends up being a little over $1.6 million coming to the school side. The one project that didn't make the prioritization list of the capital group was the HVAC ductwork repair and servicing. But that was actually brought up in the meeting while we have the other group, the engineer group and the repair group, in going school to school to do their assessment. They're going to be looking at those pieces of equipment anyway. So if they do see something that needs repair, they'll hopefully be able to repair it on the spot. If not, at least give us a real firm estimate on what the repair cost is going to be, and then we can circle back on that. But I was actually very happy to get the 7 of the 8 projects approved. The projects on the third sheet of the report that, include, let me just run through this real quick. So the door hardware repair at the 3 elementary schools, that's to change out all the door locking mechanisms in our school safety protocol. Floor replacement at Harrington, the CAF in the hallway area, a lot of the VCT tile had been cracked and breaking, so we're going to be able to fix that. Bathroom petitions at Center School. Kitchen remodel at Westland School, and we are going to actually contribute some ComEd funding to help pay for the ComEd piece of that. Kitchen ventilation at South Row, so that'll make that kitchen complete. They had an upgrade last year. They got the new roof over the kitchen and CAF area, so that South Row will be great at the end of this. The lift to Parker, the exterior lift, is included in here. And then lastly, the year 3, the final year of our security upgrade. So that was great. So that's going to accomplish security at all elementary schools. So the first year we had done the 2 middle. This past summer we did the high school. Now we're going to knock off the 4 elementary schools. So those 7 projects will be moving forward to town meeting in April for approval. So.
I just want to say that John Souza, Paul Cohen, everyone, all the department heads, everyone works together. So when it comes, to our final choices, people find ways to save money here. Gary Persichetti was great. When I started, I was going like, oh, this could, people could get angry, and it doesn't work out that way at all. And John does a beautiful job, John Souza, of organizing. It works well with Darlene and Paul, and it's a good group. And, they think about the whole town, which is
which is really important, so.
Oh, I agree. No, so I thought it was another successful year. Hopefully we'll,
I recommend adding this to the capital improvement,
I'm getting used to the
I
which is
know.
right next
Can't
to
wait for
Jeff right there.
Second
Drip,
floor.
drip.
You're drying your glasses up, I wasn't sure if it splattered.
this will go, like I said, go forward to capital in the, with that town budget in April. But very good news. I think Paul will likely touch on this Monday night in tri-board. But overall, I think it was the projects we were hoping to get accomplished. So I think we should be happy and satisfied with that.
Sort of unrelated, but related. South Road roof all done? I know that was.
Yeah.
Okay. I just said, I don't remember just hearing the.
No,
Oh, got finished, okay.
you know what ended up happening? That was the project we did through the
Right,
MSBA.
right.
And we ended up, it was kind of a late project. It had to go out to bid. We had to get the SBA funding. We got everything finalized. We had a contract awarded, and the work was gonna begin last summer.
Yeah.
But when we ended up closing school down, contractors were still able to work outside. So we were able to give the contractor access to the building between April and June. And they basically got the project done at the end of the school year when we were closed for the first round of all the COVID stuff. So over the course of the summer, they were really just doing their touch-up and whatnot. So it was the whole roof. If you're looking at South Row, the roof to the left, which is the kitchen and the cafeteria, that front awning was all replaced, and then the roof over the gymnasium. All the flat roof
Yeah.
was done. No, it really came out great. So, and we had also, as a capital project, replaced the service line of the kitchen at South Row last year. New drop ceiling, had to be washable, we put that in. And the last, they got a new cooler and freezer. So the last piece was the exhaust hood in the back of the kitchen. So now that'll be replaced. Before doing the roof, we actually put the new, Joanne, what do you call them? The new, the vents in the roof, so that we won't be cutting into the brand new roof, so they were already there. It's just a thank you. It's just a matter of switching out the hood itself. So, no, it's really in great shape.
Is that gonna help with the ceiling in South Row at all, with those individual tiles, you know, that?
So when we did the roof, it was external.
Okay, so it didn't have, that wasn't anything, issues with the roof was not causing what was happening inside the school with those?
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, at some point in time, and that is on a capital list, like just years down. It's more of an aesthetics thing. It's
Okay.
not, really a,
Safety.
it's not a safety thing. It's it's functional. It's just not exactly what we'd like. But they really need to take that down and put a whole new drop ceiling in throughout the school. It's just gonna be a big project.
All right, other questions on capital? Again, thank you, Jeff, as always, you did a great job, fight for us.
Good
You got names personally. Pretty big deal.
Last for me tonight, Sue Rosa, who's been wonderful to work with through this whole, craziness with all the COVID case management, sent over the interface report. We get this twice a year. So this is the data from our participation in this project. Again, it's a three-way funded project. Again, as Jeff mentioned, it just kind of speaks to the partnership between the schools and the city and the Board of Health for this referral service. So again, this is the report for those number of months. Again, we see relatively consistent usage from the school side. Anxiety, depression are, again, kind of the top of the list as far as what our families, students, largely students and families, are able to access. Our staff can access the service as well, but we do find that it's mostly students and families. So just sharing this report with you.
I was actually surprised that the referrals went down, and they actually mentioned it in the report, that they went down across the board
In the spring.
for, because people were just hunkering down and,
Yeah, they were just at home.
so I was actually expecting it to go up, but.
Yeah, they did know too, I mean, that wasn't unique to Chelmsford.
Right.
I guess they saw that service-wide over the course of the spring, but, certainly when schools started to reopen and the economy started to open a little bit, people really started to access and utilize the service again.
Yeah, I think coming out of this, there will be more and more.
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
You're probably right on that. All right, any questions on that report? Okay.
And last for me, just a reminder for you guys that next Monday we have a tri-board meeting. It's going to be remote, so when I get the copy of the link from the town manager, I'll email that to you. But that's next Monday night at 7 o'clock. And you can do that one from home. so it's not, we don't need to be here. But we'll do the general forecast of fiscal '22, the budgeting process, which is well underway. And as I indicated, I'm sure Paul will touch on the capital. That's all I have.
All right, any liaison reports? Jeff?
The high school PTO met last evening, virtually, remotely. They're working with the Council of Schools. In February will be the high schools month to collect food for Table of Plenty. And the PTO is going to work with National Honor and other activities at the high school in order to do that. They're looking at possibilities for other senior activities because nobody's sure what's going to be happening, come the end of the year. So they're going to look at possible other ways to celebrate our seniors. Principal Murray talked about how great and the grab and go was in December for the faculty, where they had food and a raffle. The teachers didn't know their names were in a raffle because they had pulled the names before the parents came. The PTO came with the goodies, and that was really appreciated. It came at a great time. Steve Murray also talked about how resilient the senior class has been, that they had a big fundraiser collecting shoes. It went much better than they expected. They've gone ahead, and various venues are letting them sign up for senior events without any down payment. And they can cancel, whenever they have to, because I think the venues in the area realize that this is the situation, that nobody really knows what's going on. He also said the Theater Guild, they're going to be, I think it was in the paper, Little Sun, they're going to be making their movie in the spring. The semester ends on the 26th, and the 8th grade, there'll be information coming out, but the 8th grade parent orientation will be virtual. But things, all things considered, Principal Murray talked about how great the kids and staff and everyone has been, and making the best of the situation, which I think speaks volumes to not only the staff, the students, the parents, but our community. I think that's what we have to do, and I think in all the schools they're doing that, so we've got a lot to be proud of.
Absolutely.
Anyone else, liaison?
I just would like to piggyback on what Jeff was saying. It's not even just the schools, but these organizations that support our school activities, like the Chelmsford Friends of Music and our a cappella group, have just continued to, move forward and make the best of a very difficult situation. Host virtual fundraisers or different events that allow them to be able to, keep up the support that they have provided for these in-school groups all along. So it's been really nice to work with them and to see them still diligently meeting and doing what they can to support our kids. The other thing I want to mention is that CPAC is hosting a virtual basic rights workshop on Thursday at 7 o'clock. You can check the CPAC Facebook page for the registration information and the link to the meeting. And it will focus on the IEP process.
All right, anybody else?
The Wellness Committee has sent out the list of all of their upcoming meetings, and there's one coming up in January. I believe we've been given a mentor to work with, so I'll be attending that first meeting coming up, but all the meeting dates and links have been sent out already to the committee. The EL Council is setting up a date. We will be meeting in January. And then meeting with a general group, so we're getting going on that more.
And I'll just put in, and I haven't really had a chance to go to the meeting, but the Boosters Club is still working behind the scenes. I know they were just selling cutouts of people to put in the stands for the winter sports.
Yeah,
so
we can do that.
Yeah, we're
I
gonna do
haven't
that.
done it yet, but I have to do
Yeah,
that.
so
I do that.
they're still trying to
It was
make,
Monday.
like all these groups, they're trying
This
to make
Monday?
it work.
I think wasn't the due date the 4th?
I think for the first wave, we'll have to.
Yeah, I think they'll probably do another one. But,
Sure
but
they'll
they're
let us
the same thing. They're just trying to do as much as they can to
Make some
keep
calls.
the spirit up, which is great.
There's an excellent cutting board fundraiser happening.
Yes.
at the high school, and I'm trying to think what
Yes.
class, was it
It's the
2021 or
class of
2022?
it's the class my girls are in, it's 2022, and it's being done by the workshop.
Yeah.
And the interesting part of it is that all the class reps, whether or not you did work with those machines before and those tools and so on, were involved in creating the boards, and now they've done it for the families of the reps, and now they've opened it up. It's a beautiful board, really well done. We bought some of them, and definitely worth getting, and it's a wonderful fundraiser and uses the resources available at the school. And if you have, one thing Jeff said that I really want to, these seniors really are trying to make the very best of it, and they're finding cooperation in other clubs and so on to make sure that they keep those memories going, and good for them, good for the entire school for helping them to make sure those memories are recorded and get passed on. And I think their send-off before Thanksgiving, if you haven't had a chance to see it, it was really uplifting and very, created a lot of really good spirit within the school community. So congratulations to them. I also want to add in something. We were talking about numbers and so on and performance this year. I want to say this because I think it's been extremely difficult for teachers. I think it's been extremely amount of hard work to perform to the level that they've been performing. And I want to thank them for that. And discussions of numbers and so on during this time somehow feels difficult to do. But it's something that we have to, because that's what our work is as a committee. But I just want them to know really truly that I have personally appreciated every effort that I have witnessed. And I know that when Jeff mentioned the grab and go, seeing the staff come in distant type of ways, but still just enjoying the fun of it, just made it so wonderful. And I wish every parent who contributed to that day had been there to see it. And I want to thank those parents, and I know that the other members of the group that, asked for the donations and so on would say the same thing. They were absolutely marvelous. So I want to thank them for showing that support for the staff.
Okay, anybody have any action items, new items they want to bring up?
Jay, when we talk about the numbers, you had mentioned, I think when we were doing one of our reports earlier, that we'll be taking a look at the numbers, the dashboard and upcoming meetings. Can we talk about the process for how numbers end up on the dashboard? How we get the information from the Board of Health? Like, it's not us coming up with these numbers. These are numbers that are reported to us because of positive cases.
Are you talking about the COVID dashboard?
Yes, I'm sorry, the COVID dashboard. Can we just talk about the process around how we get the numbers from the Board of Health and what exactly we're looking at when we're, and what the numbers are on DESE and why they don't match up sometimes, and
Oh, sure.
because I think the inconsistencies are very confusing to people, but it's really quite an enormous process. And
Yeah, I mean, if you want, we certainly could talk longer at another meeting about it. I can give you a quick overview. So the town posts town-wide, COVID data about cases that they're tracking and whatnot. The schools also have to report all of the cases within the schools. Obviously, we confer with the town and make sure we agree on the cases and do all the different contact tracing. But we also have to report the cases to DESE. So Peggy does that for us on a weekly basis, or many times there's a case, they confer with DESE, and between Peggy and DESE, they document the case, and they figure out, is it a case that's actually going to impact the school or not? Let's say it was a remote student who was COVID positive or had to quarantine. We still have to report that data, but that data would not appear in our dashboard because it doesn't affect the operation of a school. So there is, I know there's a lot of just confusion, or just people wonder, like, well, the report only says, there were 4 cases of COVID within the school, but I know, I've heard of 10 families that have had cases or whatnot. we're reporting every single case to DESE, obviously in conferring with the Board of Health. But our dashboard and DESE's dashboard, which do match, week for week, are only actually reporting the cases that affect school. So again, a situation where a student were remote and they were not in school would not impact the school. It would get reported to DESE, but it would not appear on the dashboard. Same for a staff member if they happen to be remote. If, say, coming back from this break, if we had a student or a staff member who was feeling ill, stayed home, went and got tested, and ever were to come back positive, when Peggy and the Board of Health do the look-back period, if they've been out of school for a week and a half and they were never in school when they could have come into contact with an individual to quarantine a class, then that would be reported to the state, but it would not appear on the dashboard because it didn't affect the school operation. I think the other thing that I do hear from time to time is people just confuse, well, why doesn't the town dashboard match the school's dashboard?
Right.
And that's never going to happen because the town is reporting all cases of all Chelmsford residents. But all cases, even with kids of Chelmsford residents, don't come to the Chelmsford Public Schools. So the town is reporting everything, where we're reporting cases impacting the Chelmsford Public Schools. There are students in Chelmsford who attend private and parochial school, who attend Neshoba Tech, who homeschool. I mean, there's a whole litany of different cases or reasons why our data is never going to match the town's data because the town is just a larger pool, if you want to think about it that way. Peggy and Sue confer, or Sue's staff, because it's so big now, do confer on every single case in a school. The Board of Health would call us and tell us if there's a case. Oftentimes, quite honestly, the families have been excellent. They call us first. So if they know they got a positive test result, before it even gets in the system for the Board of Health to tell us, Peggy may have the data, and then she may call the Board of Health to say, hey, we're flagging this one for you. No parent's going to report that they have a case if they don't really have a case. So we're able to kind of flag that, start our contact tracing process quicker than even waiting. But again, that town dashboard is just never going to match because they have everyone, and we only have the kids that actually come to the Chelmsford Public Schools. I don't know if that helps in any way.
It does, and, just to maybe, as I said, just talk a little bit more about that when we do discuss this, because we're not operating as a separate entity from the Board of Health
Right.
or from the Department of Education. It's a collaboration between all three. We're not making unilateral decisions about what to report or not to report. This isn't done in conjunction with the Board of Health, and I want to make sure that people understand that. And also to discuss what the reason behind the lag is, and I think part of it is because they were so backlogged with either information or, waiting for test results. And again, that isn't really something that we have a lot of control over.
Right.
But, I just so that people understand kind of how all of the pieces come together and, why it is that we encounter some of the problems that we encounter.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and you can have a lag for several reasons. I mean, it can be just taking time to get a test back. Again, what I have found is that people are being appropriate, and while the test result, they're awaiting it, they're staying home, so that if it ever did come back positive, it's not impacting the school community. But we also can't dictate to staff or students, if they're identified as a close contact, let's say, that they have to go get tested. Some may go on day, 3, 4, 5, some might wait until day 5, 6, 7. And that's obviously then gonna impact when we get a test result back and when we can do our work. There are a lot of variables involved in this. It is, technically all three of us are separate entities, but they're working hand in hand. Every single case is reported. It's just a matter of what we're putting on our dashboard are really cases that impact both us and DESE, the actual functioning of a school. Because if you think about it, it really wouldn't make sense to be publishing data about people who are homeschooled or people who are remote learners who happen to be a close contact or become infected with COVID if they're at home and it's not going to impact the school. That would actually almost make people just nervous for no reason for them to be nervous. So there really is a rationale for the whole thing. The three entities are working very closely in supporting each other, and it's a good information sharing process.
In light of that, if a student is a remote student and participating in sports or activities, What happens with that reporting?
I'll have to find out because I don't want to give you misinformation. If the student is a remote student but is on, say, a sports team and tests positive, then that would take the sports team out. I don't know necessarily I don't know if that's gonna impact the school day itself. I believe it does. So I'm gonna wager and say
Okay.
it would be posted, but let me find out for sure for you.
Because that has been one of the concerns. The other thing is the lag time is more and more people have commented to me on that. You know, and when, especially right before the holiday, or I think it was right before, we got 4 notices in a row that, you know, 4 people had tested positive, and it was like 10 or 8 to 10 days before. So, you know, people get very concerned about that because it is so much of a lag time. Finally, one other comment on this reporting stuff is at the high school level especially, if these kids have certain things that are going on, for example, they're gonna do SATs or they're coming up on PSATs, whatever it is, their concern is that if they're quarantined, they have to cancel.
Right.
And so, is there an option that, you know, they can contact the school and say, I've got this coming up and I just can't take a risk on quarantining? What happens with that?
I don't think I'm following your question.
So you go to school, everything is fine, and you know, 2 days before you're due to take the test, you get a notice that you're now in a quarantine. So if you're in a quarantine, you can not go to your test anymore. You can't go to something that was very important to get rescheduled again. Is going to be difficult to do in this COVID environment. What do those kids do?
If they're quarantined, they can't go take the test.
They can't.
No.
Right. So do they get an option of contacting the school and saying, okay, I've got a test coming up on Thursday, I'm scheduled to take it, I'm gonna do remote for these 2 days because I don't wanna get quarantined?
All right, I was misunderstanding what you're saying. I mean, you should always have the conversation with the school, but I would say it could be just as likely that you end up getting quarantined at home as opposed to just being in the school. I am concerned, and I totally get the situation at the high school with the kids, but we can't get to a situation where if people have picked hybrid, then they need to kind of own that they're in the hybrid program and they're going in the days that they should be there. By all accounts, if they're not feeling good, you know, they're ill, they have any concerns, we don't want them coming to school and they should go remote. But we can't be in a situation where, you know, we'll wake up in the morning and it's cold outside, so, you know, we don't want to drive to school and come,
Yeah.
it happens. You know, even on some of this other stuff, it can't be like willy-nilly when they're part of it or not, because they could be in some other activity that they're involved with, potentially a close contact. We are, and I have been talking to our admin staff and Peggy and our health folks around, you know, our whole identification of close contacts, because again, we're over-reporting close contacts, and I think particularly at the high school level, we're getting to the point, even on communications, where people aren't paying attention anymore because there's just so many emails that are coming out saying, you know, someone in our community has contracted COVID. People, we don't want to get to the point where they're saturated and they're not paying attention to important communications. So we are considering, we're not making a change now, I would bring the recommendation first, but changing our notification cycle. We may go to, you know, a daily posting on, say, the website, so that if someone wanted to go and check the daily numbers at the high school, let's say they could, but not sending out those generic, someone in our community has the COVID, only sending an email directly to the people who were affected. So we are working on this, and I'm gonna have something for you at the next school committee on that front, because I think people are just getting lost in, particularly at the high school. It's not happening quite as much at the elementary or the middle school level, but it's almost like a daily occurrence, because they are even notifying people if they're not necessarily at school, you know, that someone had COVID. They're getting the generic letter, and I don't want to get to the point where people aren't paying attention to their email, or they're glossing over it because they're just so used to seeing it. So that'll be for next meeting. But no, it's an issue.
Okay.
All right, any other new items people have? Maria, you had something, no?
No.
Okay. Just a couple from me, and again, this was not the meeting to have this discussion, but, you know, next meeting after, if we could have a discussion about if things get better, and I'm an optimist, so I'm hoping things get better, you know, what is the plan in terms of
Yep.
increasing face-to-face learning time with the students? And what types of things do we have to do to prepare for that? Whether it be work with the union or working with rooms in the schools and that type of thing. So if we could have that conversation. You know.
Okay.
And then, and again, I don't know whenever this information will ever come out, but I know that educators are coming up next on, or soon on the vaccination list. So
Right.
whatever kind of plan is in place to, you know, make vaccinations available for our staff, you know, when that,
Oh, we want to do that.
Yeah, right.
So, and that again is something that like Peggy is in close contact with Sue from the Board of Health. To know when we're going to start getting the vaccine, when it can be distributed. So yes, I'll give you updates with that as soon as we know.
okay, great. All right, anything else? Okay, anybody have any further public comment that they received? Okay, if not, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Okay, 5-0.